in Proverbs 31. Today being Mother's Day, it's a day when we pay special tribute to our moms in various ways. Some people go to visit their moms. Some people take her out to dinner. Some people give them a special gift. But the sad thing is that often times Mother's Day is really just a time when families try to make up for time that they hadn't spent with their mothers. It's a make-up time, and that's not good. Some people have neglected their moms. They have disrespected their moms. Some of them have showed a lack of appreciation for their moms. So it shouldn't be a way that we try to make up things. It should be an everyday thing. And I should know that part every day because my mom's not here anymore. And let me tell you, my mother was a mother. She was my mother and my daddy for about 4 years after my daddy passed away when I was 15 years old. And so she has had to take his place for a little while. But there's things I want to talk about this morning, and this Proverbs, we're going to skip over them because it's not all of them, but verse 10 says, who can find a virtuous woman? Talking about women, talking about mothers, the heart of her husband. It tells us in verse 11, trust her. In verse 12, it says she does good to him and not evil. And jumping down to verse 15, it says, moms also rises yet when it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her handmaid. And again, as I read these things, I just see a picture of my mother. I see a picture of my mother. And we're going to add something to this in a few minutes that I learned when I was a Boy Scout, believe it or not. It's got something to do with my mother too. Verse 17 says, she girds herself with strength. Was your mother strong? Was your mother one that was willing to put out her arms and strengthen you? In verse 20, we look and she extends her hand to the poor. Verse 25 says, strength and honor are her clothing. And again, I can just see my mother in all of these things. I hope you can see yours. She opens her mouth with wisdom, verse 26 tells us. She watches over her ways of her household, and her children rise up and call her blessed. And verse 31 says, give her the fruit of her hands. You know, there were several mothers in the Bible that we are real familiar with. The very first mother, everybody knows who was the very first mother in the Bible? Eve. And then we had Sarah. We had Rebecca, the wife of Isaac. Jochebed, the mother of Moses. Hannah, we're going to talk a little bit about her this morning. She was the mother of the prophet Samuel. And Bathsheba, the wife of David. We've got Elizabeth in the Bible, the mother of John the Baptist. But we got a special mother too. Mother. The mother of Jesus Christ himself. Her name was Mary. You know, I was reading chapter 31 and all these things that it tells about a woman. And something popped in my mind while I'm riding this week. The Lord does that a whole lot to me. He just pops things right in. Sometimes he pops them right back out, you know, and I have to try to figure out 3 hours later what I was supposed to write down that I didn't. But when I was in the Boy Scouts, we had a scout oath. On my honor, I will do my best to God and my country to obey the scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. That's the scout oath. But there was scout laws. There was 12 of them. Now, I don't know why they chose 12. Jesus chose 12 apostles. But there was 12 laws that the Boy Scouts had to remember. A scout's trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. I learned those when I was about 12 years old, and they just stuck with me. It was our scout laws. But something told me this week says, instead of putting a scout is, put a mother is, and see how it fits in. And it's a perfect fit because the first one I said was trustworthy. My mother, and I hope your mother too, was a trustworthy person. My mother told the truth. She always kept her promises. I can remember some of the promises she kept that I didn't like, because she promised me that I was going to get a spanking before I went to bed that night. Well, about 7 o'clock that night, I said, thank goodness she forgot it. Well, about 7:30, she said, okay, it's time. She kept her promises. It reminds me of me being in Walmart somewhere and seeing women telling their children in the day we live in today, if you do that one more time, I'm going to spank you. 2 minutes later, if you do that one more time, I'm going to spank you. They were doing the same thing. And it goes on and on for about 20 times, and sometimes even your preacher wants to say, lady, will you just spank the young'un? You know, but the world we live in today, we don't have a lot of trustworthy people. My mother was trustworthy. I hope your mother was. My mother was loyal, and I hope your mother was loyal. She showed that she cared about her family. She cared about her friends. She cared about her, listen to this, she cared about her church, school, and country. She was loyal. Every Sunday we were going to be in church. I can remember going on trips to Baltimore, Maryland. That's back when we used to get pins for perfect attendance. Where if we stopped at another church and brought the bulletin back with us, we got counted present for our Sunday school pin. We stopped many a time beside a roadside table. Any of y'all remember the roadside tables out on 95 and different places? They have picnic tables. You pull off the road, and we would open up the back, and my mother would have lunch ready, so that when we visited a church somewhere between here and Baltimore, after church, we'd stop by the roadside table, pull out that picnic. They don't do that a lot anymore, because guess what? I don't know what the difference makes today, but they're afraid the food's going to spoil before they can eat it. But my mother was always loyal to her church and her country. And then that word helpful that the Boy Scout said, that was to volunteer to help others. My mother volunteered to help others, and she didn't expect anything in return. She was helpful. I hope your mother was helpful. And then the next law was friendly. You couldn't find a better person to be a friend to anyone than my mother. She was friendly to everybody, even people that were different than us. She always taught us, make them your friend also. They've got a spirit and a heart just like you've got. They've got circumstances that you probably don't have, and they need friends. But my mother was always friendly. She was always courteous. Be polite to everyone and always use good manners. My mother taught us these things. And kind was the next law. Treat others the way that you wanted to be treated. I've heard my mother say that many a time. And she also said this one about never harm or kill any living thing without a good reason. Barbara and I were talking about rabbits in our yard, and I said, yeah, we used to eat them things all the time, and we lived off of rabbits. We lived in the country, and a lot of times that was our supper, was eating rabbits. Now, for all the people that's on the video that don't know what supper is, that's the last middle of the day. It's not dinner. We ate dinner at 12 o'clock. So they even changed that, you know, it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner to people. To me, it's breakfast, dinner, and supper. But my mother always told us not to kill anything unless we plan on eating it or giving it to somebody that needed to eat it. And obedience comes in as another law. She followed the rules. She followed the family rules. In fact, she made some of the family rules that we had to follow. She followed the rules of what the school said that they were going to do with her children, which is another thing we can't do today. My mother said, if he's bad, spank him. Spank him. And then when I got home, I'd get another one. So if you ever got spanked at school, you got two, because you got one when you got home. She obeyed the laws. My mother would get on the highway and drive. If it said 55, she was going to drive 55. Now, Barbara and I were talking about my aunt today, and I used to love to get in that Buick convertible they had with the speedometer that went across. It was a red line, and she buried that red line at 90 miles an hour going down a dirt road with the top down, and that was so much fun. But my mother won't like that. She obeyed the laws. And then cheerful. Is your mother cheerful? Does she look on the bright side of everything? Carefully do the task that comes your way and try to make other people happy too. I had a cheerful mother also. Thrifty. Work and pay your own way. Try not to be wasteful. Use time, food, supplies, and natural resources wisely. And for all you people out there, anybody want to ever invite me to lunch, don't have rutabagas. Look at Miss Betty. Miss Betty had rutabagas one night. Barbara eat them. I don't eat them. My mother said not to be wasteful when she put that big bowl of rutabagas up on the table and looked at us three little children. You got to eat them or you can't get up from the table. We ate everything but the rutabagas. We started crying because we didn't want rutabagas. Mama started crying. And my daddy even started crying and said, they don't have to eat them things. And as of today, I don't have to eat rutabagas because my daddy said so. And then brave. My mother was brave. She faced some difficult situations. She lost my daddy when I was 15 years old. Tony was 9 years old. LaVon was 17. And then she had to raise us. Can you imagine what went through her mind in this difficult situation? And I'm sure at times she felt afraid, but she did what she thought was right, despite of what other people told her she needed to do. Mama was brave. She was a brave person. Clean. Keep your body and mind fit. Help keep your home and community clean. That's one thing I didn't ever have to live in was a dirty house. Never. My mother was clean. And she also, when I'd get out of the shower or the tub and come in there, let me look behind your ears. See if you washed behind them ears. So I know you've all been there before. I see a lot of you laughing. So you had the type of mother I had. And then reverent. The most important one out of the 12 is your mother reverent? Was my mother reverent? Was she reverent towards God? Was she faithful to her religion, her religious duties, and respect in her belief in life? And all I get is 3-letter word, yes, she was. Yes, yes. You know, we find characters in the Bible. One of my favorite ones is to look at Timothy. When Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 1, Paul wrote to Timothy and he says, I thank God whom I serve with a pure conscience as my forefathers did, as without ceasing I remember you in my prayers day and night. Has your mom ever prayed for you? I'm sure she has. And here Paul was saying to Timothy, I pray for you. But he's got a reason here. He says, greatly desiring to see you, being mindful of your tears, that I may be filled with joy. And then verse 5, he calls to remembrance the faith that is in you. Timothy, you've got faith. And then he put, why? Because it first dwelled in your grandmother Lois, and it dwelled in your mother Eunice. And I am persuaded also in you. In other words, that hand-me-down come from your grandmother, it went to your mother, and it went to you. So he put mother in there especially, and believed that Timothy was committed to his mother. I've got some little stories that I didn't want to leave. Mother's Day is always fun when you can read stories. A teacher gave her class of second graders a lesson on a magnet. Everybody knows what a magnet is. It goes together. M-A-G-N-E-T. And what it does. And the next day, she had a written test. And she put the question down there. My full name has 6 letters. The first one is M, and I pick up things. What am I? That was the question on her test. She was surprised when the students turned in the papers and 50% of them put mother. Mother. A 4-year-old and a 6-year-old went to give their mom a present on Mother's Day, and they gave her a household plant. They used their own money, and they were thrilled to give it to her, and she was thrilled to receive it. But the older one said, with a sad face, There was a bouquet that we wanted to give you at the flower shop, but it was real pretty, but it was too expensive. It had a ribbon on it that said, "Rest in peace." And we thought it would be just perfect since you're always asking us for a little peace so that you can rest. You know, we look at the story of Eve gave birth to Cain. She took the role of a mother. She became the central figure in our world, the first mother that was on this earth. She took precedence over everything, raising those children. And then Bill Cosby come along and he put a little story in. He says even though it's the dad who takes his small son, he builds him up to be tough, a mean football hero, and when his son is big enough to be playing for 100,000 people on national television, the television camera, after scoring a big play, they turn to him and he says, "Hi, Mom." Isn't it true? Always. A teacher asked a little boy a question, and this is a math question. She said, suppose your mama baked a pie, and there were 7 of you in the family, your parents and 5 children. What part of the pie would you get? The little boy said, 1/6. The teacher said, I'm afraid you don't know your fractions. She said, remember, there are 7 of you. The little boy said, yes, teacher, I know. He says, but you don't know my mother. My mother would say she didn't want any of the pie. You know, mothers, we can say at one time had come a long ways, but unfortunately in the world we live in today, there's so many mothers, and thank God for the 2 that's sitting back there with them new little babies today. They bring their babies to church. They are proud of those babies. But you would be surprised at the world we live in today if we had a percentage of, especially women that don't want them to start with, and then when they have them, they want to give them away. Can I have one of y'all's baby? Take them. Well, I didn't think so. But there's so many mothers that get distressed with their children. Mothers pray. Mothers cry. And I can't tell you how many times that my mama prayed for me that I didn't even know it. And I got something in my pocket I was going to read this morning, but nope, don't think I would make it. It's last year before my sister died, she sent me an email right before Mother's Day. My one died in July, so it was in May. She sent me a picture of my birthday. April 8th, my mother had wrote out a little story thanking God for me. She wrote one for Tony, but it was a little different. But just a little bit. But anyway, if I have the nerve, I'm gonna sit it right here. I might read it to you before it's over. But it was a letter that I never knew anything about. But it tells me how my mother knew about me. It even had part of it in there that how I would be used. She never got to see me preach. Except when me and Barbara first got married, I was licensed to be a minister. My mother heard me then, but I've had so many people to say, your mother would be so proud of you. When I read that letter, I said, whew, she just didn't know. Or she did know and I didn't. But here's a true story that Charles Spurgeon wrote. He said, this past Sunday, a dead man joined the church. A dead man. About 2 months ago, the 18-year-old son of a single mother, who had only recently, the mother had become a Christian, OD'd on drugs. His mother was called to the hospital and she had to make some difficult decisions. But she requested that the church pray for her son would regain enough mental facilities before he died to accept Christ. Just pray that he'd accept Christ before he dies. However, he did not improve. and was declared brain dead. He was taken off of life support, but his mother requested that the church continue to pray that he would regain consciousness enough to make a decision. The hospital staff thought this lady was crazy. Taken off life support, he continued to breathe. He even moved a little bit, but this is not unusual, according to the story. But then on Mother's Day, he opened his eyes and suddenly told his mother that he loved her. He continued to improve and was later moved to an extended care facility, and while there, he accepted Christ. On June 11, 2000, during the 11 o'clock service, he was wheeled down the aisle in his wheelchair and made a public confession to accept Christ. His fiancée also was saved the same day. How many mothers have prayed and wept for their children? We need mothers today like that. More mothers, strong mothers. And I told you I was going to mention Hannah, Samuel's mother. She couldn't have children. And back then, if you couldn't have children, you were cutting the family line out, and it was stress on them. And she prayed and prayed and prayed to God to give her a son, and she would give him back to God. Just give me a son, and I'll give him back to you. And you know, it happened. God made it happen. A little boy forgot his lines in a Sunday school presentation. His mother was on the front row, and she was there to prompt him if he forgot something. She would either move her lips, to help him out. But that didn't help. He forgot one of his lines, and he kept looking at her, and she was trying to tell him. And she leaned forward and whispered, she went kind of out, I am the light of the world. That's what he had left out. So he beamed with great feeling and a loud, clear voice. He said, my mother is the light of the world. So these stories, like I said, I really love them. I really love them. But the most important story that I know in the whole Bible was in John chapter 2, when Jesus' mother told the people, when he told them that she went and told Jesus to have no more wine, and she looked at those people and he says, do whatever he tells you to do. Yeah. And that line today means the same thing for us. Whatever Jesus tells you to do today, you do it. You do it. And he's told us a lot of things too. One day, a young man comes in on Mother's Day morning, standing by his mother's bed. He says, hey, Mom, wake up. I made you a Mother's Day card. And she said, Ma, how sweet of you. He said, I did it all by myself. Go ahead and read it. So she begins to read, and it says, I was going to buy you a card with hearts, pink and red, but then I thought I'd rather spend the money on me instead. It's awful hard to buy things when one's allowance is so small. So I guess you're pretty lucky you got anything at all. Happy Mother's Day. There, I've said it. Now I'm done. So how about getting up out of bed and fixing breakfast for your son? But Jesus told us a lot of things that we needed to do throughout the Bible. And everything that Jesus got to tell us, to make suggestions to us what we need to do, do it. If it says do it. Where did Jesus get his information from? He got it from God. He tells us that. Everything that God told Jesus is in this book. He said do it. And then I'm going to end with one more. Everybody knows Irma Bombeck. She was a character. She defined motherhood, in closing today, better than any other article that I've ever read. She said, for the first 4 or 5 years after I had children, I considered motherhood a temporary condition, not a calling. She said it was a time of my life set aside for exhaustion, long hours, but I was hoping it would pass. Then one afternoon, with 3 kids in tow, I came out of the supermarket pushing a cart with 4 wheels that wanted to go in opposite directions. When my toddler son got away from me and just outside the door, he ran toward a machine holding bubble gum, the big old glass bubble gum machines. In a voice that shattered glass, he shouted, "Gimme, gimme, gimme." I told him that I'd give him what he needed if he didn't stop hollering. As I physically tried to pry the little boy's body away from that bubble gum machine, he pulled the entire thing over. Glass, balls of bubble gum went all over everywhere, all over the parking lot. And now they had attracted a very sizable crowd. I told him he would never see a cartoon as long as he lived. And if he didn't control his temper, he was going to make a license plate. He was going to be making license plates for the state. So he tried to stifle his sobs as he looked around and he realized that the crowd was staring at him. Then he did something that I remember for the rest of my life. In a helpless quest for comfort, he turned to the only one he knew that trusted his emotions. She said, "That was me." He threw his arms around my knee, held on for dear life. I had humiliated him, chastened him, and berated him, but I was still all that he had had. She said that incident was something that she would never forget, and it was a major force in her child's life. Today, sometimes we forget how important stability is to a child. She said, "I've always been told mine, the easiest part of being a mother is giving birth. The hardest part is showing up each day. Showing up each day." A lot to be said there. The little child, after he had been chastened, went to the only one that he could trust, and that was the one that was punishing him. And we are just like that today. God tells us when we're wrong. But when we get in trouble, where do we go? We go to God. And that's what he wants us to do. I ask you this morning, if you have a need in your heart, this altar is going to be open this morning. What a wonderful day that we get to celebrate today. Is a day that we celebrate our mothers. So if you would take your hymn books. And after we get done singing this song, I'm going to try to read y'all what my mother said. I think I can do it now. 264, Kneel at the Cross. 264. We'll sing all 3, and the altar is open this morning.